For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want to give you this hypothetical scenario. This player right here is South Carolina quarterback Spencer Rattler, and a lot of people have him projected to go in the NFL draft at some point toward the middle. Will he be a day one pick? Absolutely not. He might not even be a round 2 pick, but no one thinks he's going to go undrafted. At the very least, he will hear his name called, and will get a chance to prove himself in the National Football League. The NFL Draft is taking place on April 25th. Now I want you to imagine that on April 20th, not even a week before the draft, Rattler comes out and says, "Hey guys, I appreciate all of you expressing interest in me, and I appreciate you guys wanting to draft me and thinking I can play in the NFL, but this isn't for me. If you draft me, I'm not going to play. I'm going to go to graduate school and pursue a different career." And it's not so much the fact that Rattler would skip the NFL to go and continue his education. Something like that, by itself, wouldn't be too uncommon or unusual, as we've seen players have aspirations beside football before. It's more the fact that, number one, this guy was projected to get drafted by everyone, and in a fairly good spot, I might add. And number two, this guy announced this move not even a week before the draft, and after going through the process. Something like that would be incredibly bizarre and incredibly unusual, right? Well, I bring that hypothetical scenario up because entering the 1980 NFL Draft, that's exactly what happened with this man right here. This man is a quarterback out of Tulane by the name of Roch Hontas, and after the 1979 season, he was projected to be one of the first quarterbacks off the board. He wasn't in that tier 1 of guys that wasn't going to go in the first few rounds, but he was in that second tier of quarterbacks that was going to hear his name called somewhere around the middle of the 12-round NFL Draft. And then, he decided, just days before the draft, that football wasn't for him, throwing a bunch of people off guard and throwing a ton of teams who had him on their draft board for a loop. Because this is the story of Roch Hontas, as in, the man who gave up his shot at playing in the NFL to go to medical school. Before I talk about the decision that Hontas made and what led to it, we need some context to understand just how good Roch Hontas was at Tulane, and where he was projected to wind up in the first place. The year is 1979, and Tulane is led at quarterback by this man right here, Roch Hontas. For the first 3 years that Hontas played for the Green Wave, he wasn't really anything to write home about. No one had him getting drafted, and no one had him possibly thinking about an NFL career. Over his first 3 seasons with Tulane, not only was Tulane getting no recognition, seeing as they went 2-9, 3-8, and 4-7, but Hontas wasn't doing anything of note statistically, throwing 18 touchdowns and 27 interceptions across those 3 seasons. Yes, touchdown to interception ratio was a bit different back then, as it wasn't uncommon for quarterbacks to throw more picks than touchdowns, seeing as Dan Marino did that at Pitt in 1982. But he wasn't doing anything that was capturing the attention of scouts. He was going unnoticed. Then, the 1979 season happened, and everything changed. Because in 1979, Roch Hontas set the world on fire, and the country took notice. Against all odds, Tulane had a winning record for the first time since 1973, and got an invitation to the Liberty Bowl to take on Penn State. Tulane won 9 games, which was tied for the most wins they had in a season since 1934. And a big reason why was an explosive offense that finished inside the top 20 of college football in points scored, led by quarterback Roch Hontas. In 1979, Hontas had 21 touchdown passes, throwing for more touchdowns that season than he did in his first 3 years combined, and he had 2,345 passing yards on top of that. By completing 215 passes for 2,345 yards and 21 touchdowns, Hontas set single-season records at Tulane in just about every major statistical passing category. His 215 completions ranked 5th in the entire NCAA, His 2,345 passing yards ranked 6th in the entire NCAA, and his 21 touchdowns ranked 3rd, only behind Mark Wilson of BYU and Brian Brumo of Temple. For his efforts, he was named the top offensive college football player in the entire state of Louisiana by the Louisiana Sports Writers Association. And when Tulane made it to the Liberty Bowl, Hontas had a solid outing and was named the MVP of the game. Yes, Tulane lost the game, which makes it weird as to why Hontas won MVP, but they voted on MVP back then before the final 2 minutes of the game were over. So it led to that bizarre anomaly where a guy on the losing team won the MVP, a la Super Bowl V with Chuck Howley and the Dallas Cowboys losing that game to the Baltimore Colts. And with Hontas looking great all season, the narrative began to shift. Entering the 1979 season, there was no narrative with Hontas and his chances at the NFL. He was a camp invite at most. But after the 1979 season, when he became a household name and a guy that most college football fans knew about, the narrative became, okay, this guy can play in the NFL, even if he is a bit undersized. Just how high is he going to get drafted? He got to play in the Japan Bowl, a college all-star game that used to be held in Japan, and even threw a touchdown pass in that game. Playing well in an all-star game always catches the attention of scouts. And it became very clear that Hontas was going to have a future in professional football. A month before the draft, the rumor was that the Ottawa Rough Riders of the Canadian Football League were going to offer him a massive contract, but he wasn't going to take it because he was going to go in the NFL draft. Said Hontas, "I'm trying to get it all straightened out in my own mind. Ottawa hasn't made me a flat-out offer yet, and much of what I do will depend on how good the offer is. From what I understand, I will be drafted if I wait, but it's uncertain how high I'll go, so you can see it's a difficult decision." Having said that, there were 15 quarterbacks that got drafted in 1979, including a guy named Larry Fortner, who got chosen by the Miami Dolphins. At Miami of Ohio, he threw 5 touchdowns and 13 interceptions and completed 48% of his passes. This is to say that if he could get drafted, yeah, Hontas would get drafted. That was not even a discussion. And it seemed like from all the scouting reports I could find, he was projected to go anywhere between rounds 4 through 6. There was a clear top 2 with BYU quarterback Mark Wilson and Arizona State quarterback Mark Malone. And then there was the polarizing choice of Arkansas State quarterback Gene Bradley, who was a complete wild card in this, seeing as he was super raw and played baseball, but had a ton of potential because of how hard he threw. But in that second tier of guys, like Eric Hipple, Ed Luther, Paul McDonald, and Scott Bruner, where they'll go around the 100th pick, you had Roch Hontas. However, football wasn't the only thing on the mind of Roch Hontas. Sure, it would be nice to play in the NFL and continue to be competitive, but that was never the expectation at all. Remember, for the first 3 years of his career, no one in their right mind was talking about Hontas as an NFL player, and no one was considering that. Because Hontas had his eyes potentially set on medical school. The reason he ended up going to Tulane was because they had an unbelievable pre-med program. Playing football was a nice bonus, but that wasn't his primary reason for going to school or for picking Tulane. And even though he seemed destined for medical school, once the 1979 season happened and he started playing well and started reading the papers and listening to the reports, he got a bit of a big head and lost sight of why he went to Tulane in the first place, to pursue an education and become a doctor. And with that, he talked to his family, and after speaking to his family members, made a decision that shocked the NFL just days before the draft. Because on April 23rd, 1980, just 6 days before the NFL draft on April 29th, and just 6 days before he was pretty much guaranteed to hear his name called, Roch Hontas, a surefire quarterback who was going to get drafted, was telling teams not to draft him. He was going to go to medical school. Said Hontas not even a week before the draft, "It's something I've really thought about for a long time, and I've thought about little else since the first of the year. I didn't want to wait until after the draft. People would say he didn't like the team that picked him, or he didn't go high enough, or he couldn't settle on a contract. I wanted to make it clear that whether I was picked first or 101st, I would not be a candidate for the draft. I wanted to let as many pro teams as possible know that if they were interested in me, they shouldn't waste a draft choice. He then added on his decision, I think I could have been a good professional quarterback, and I'll probably think that 20 years from now. But if I had given it a try, then 20 years from now, I might just be finishing my residency. I think I would have been a good, solid, middle-round pick in the draft. Now, of course, we'll never actually know. And regarding the big head thing I mentioned earlier, that wasn't me speculating or projecting. That was entirely what Hontas thought himself. As he said, up until 8 months ago, I didn't dream of being considered for the pro draft. Then, I lost sight of the fact that my primary reason for going to Tulane was, yes, to play football, but primarily to get into medical school. All of a sudden, with the winning season and the headlines and the bowl games, I lost sight of what I was here for. I started completing a couple of passes this year, and I lost sight of my goals a little bit. In other words, being a doctor was a dream for years, ever since he was a little kid. And even though the bright lights of the NFL were intriguing and became a legit possibility and a legit temptation over the last few months, he realized that this could potentially derail his main dream. The NFL thing was never supposed to happen. The medical career was always his goal, and it took until a week before the draft for him to realize, wait a second, this isn't what I want. So he essentially dropped out. Now you might wonder why he didn't try combining the two and try going to medical school during the offseason and playing during the other months. Obviously, that's a lot easier said than done, but we've seen players do that, where they continue their education in the offseason and play in the fall. Dwayne Woodruff, a player in Pittsburgh's secondary for over a decade, went to law school during the offseason. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. We've seen players request trades for the purpose of being able to potentially continue their education, just as a matter of practicality. And in theory, yes, Roch Hontas could have done that. Safety Tommy Casanova was one of the best of his era, and he did that while playing for the Cincinnati Bengals. We never really got an elaboration on why Hontas didn't opt to go this route and try doing two things at once, but it was clear. He was going to medical school. The NFL draft was not for him. And for those wondering whether this decision worked out for Roch Hontas, well, he's been practicing for nearly the last 40 years. He graduated from the Tulane University School of Medicine in 1984, and for the last 39 years has been practicing orthopedic surgery. And from everything I could find online, he's got really good reviews. Now, granted, I don't have personal experience with him. I've never gotten surgery from him. I've never been to Louisiana in my life, so obviously I have not gotten surgery from him, but from everything I can tell, he seems like he's really good, and when you're in the same profession for 4 decades, you're obviously doing something right. Now, you might be wondering, well, yeah, it worked out for him, but does he have any regrets at all? Does he ever think to himself, well, I probably could have been good in the NFL, do I regret not taking that opportunity when I had the chance? Well, he did an interview last year where he spoke about this decision to some extent. I'll leave a link to the full interview in the description, but take a listen to this part. It doesn't seem like he has a whole lot of regrets whatsoever.
I came to Tulane primarily for the purpose of an education and to enhance my chances of getting into graduate school, in this case medical school. Of all the schools that I looked at and of all the schools that I visited, and I thought a really solid, back then you could visit 6 schools.
Okay.
And I took 6 formal visits, and it kept coming back to Tulane. Now, I mentioned my older brother a little earlier. My older brother Mark was currently in med school. He was a first-year med student that year that I was being recruited. And I talked to some people from the med school, and it just seemed like this was the best opportunity.
You knew you were going to be a doctor?
Even then, yes.
Even then, in high school?
Yes, I did.
And so you had a plan?
I did.
And I think you could have been a great NFL quarterback. I truly do. You ever think about that?
No.
You're the same size as Drew Brees. I mean, you're the same size as Drew Brees.
As I said, my purpose of coming to school was to enhance my chances of getting into med school. If I was even able to play it down, that would have been terrific. I didn't have any. I wanted to play. I wanted to compete. You know, I played a lot in high school, and I certainly wanted to compete. But it wasn't going to make or break my my self-esteem if I was not going to play one down at Tulane. It really wasn't.
I don't think we're going to be seeing a Roch Hontas situation take place during the 2024 NFL Draft. Just a hunch. I don't think we're going to be seeing one of these mid-round quarterbacks like Spencer Rattler or Jordan Travis or Michael Pratt decide just days before the draft to tell teams, nah, I'm good. I know I played in a postseason All-Star game and went through the process and whatnot, but I'm not going to play football professionally, and I'm going to continue my education. But in 1980, that's exactly what happened with the man you've been watching this whole time, Tulane quarterback Roch Hontas. Because for Roch, it seemed like his 1979 season with Tulane mirrored that of his career in surgery for the last 40 years. Solid as a rock. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.